All right, everybody. I hope that you had a good weekend and that the challenge is going well for you. We appreciate the comments that you've been sharing. It's been really insightful for us to get to know your mind and your hearts. And you all are good parents who just really want good things. You want your kids to get along so that they can have good relationships and so that your home can be a place of peace and happiness and joy for everybody in it. And you want your families to be each other's best friends. And that's all amazing. You guys are fantastic. And we just appreciate you and your good hearts. So, we are going to talk today about the next step, the next thing to do, which is identifying your own personal boundaries. Last week, we talked about what's in your control and what's out of your control. And you may have had the shocking aha moment that I had when first learning about child development and family functioning, that our children's choices are out of our control. So I cannot actually do anything to force my kids to get along. I cannot make that happen. That is not in my control. I cannot force my kids to like each other, to want to have a relationship with each other, to use interpersonal skills well. I can't force that to happen, which stinks. I wish it was in my control. I wish it was in your control. Good golly, it would solve a lot of problems. So, what is in your control? Your choices, your body, your ears, your head, your what you listen to, what you get exposed to, what you experience, those types of things you do get to have be in your control. And the way that you set that up is by creating something called a boundary. Now, for those of you who have done boundary work in the past, this is not going to be new information for you, but a good refresher. But for those of you who haven't, we need to cover this. This is essential to all human relationships. So we've got to cover this. So the first thing that a discoverer would do when going to a new country is to outline, or like discovering a new country, it would be to outline the boundary. And then the person who is the ruler or the lawmaker gets to define what is safe and acceptable to happen within that boundary. So we have that here in the United States where I live, and then each state has a boundary and has lawmakers for those states that get to decide what is safe and acceptable within that state. The same thing happens on a county level, on a city level, and then within the city, there's even stores that get to decide, and schools and parks and different businesses that get to decide what is okay within the boundary, what they have ownership of, what is within their control. Now, my neighbor should never come over to me and say, my dishwasher is broken and now you should pay to fix it. Why not? Because he has ownership of that. That's in his boundary. So, what is in your boundary, you have ownership of, responsibility for, and you get to make the decisions for what's okay in that boundary and what's not. So, where parents get confused is that they blur the lines between the boundaries of parent and child. And it's easy to do. We are responsible for so much within their boundary when they're little that we keep that line really, it's not even a line. Like a lot of parents will just completely erase it and want to control everything within their child's boundary or just fix everything within their child's boundary. Really, really normal. However, we need to picture that within your home, you have individuals that each have boundaries around them too, and that we are in charge of deciding what is okay within our own boundary and what isn't okay, and make a clear distinction between us and our kids, our boundary and their boundary. So they may choose to argue. That is in their boundary. And we're going to talk about how to change that in the next couple of lessons. So stick with me. But right now, we're focused on our own personal boundary. So, what are you okay with in your own personal boundary? Are you okay listening to arguing and bickering, or is that a problem for you? And you can tell if it's a problem for you. Your body sends you signals if something is happening within your boundary that you're not okay with. You'll feel agitation or frustration or resentment. Your heart will start beating. Your muscles will start to tighten. You'll start to feel annoyed. That like emotional thermometer in your brain and in your body will start to go up, and it will start to feel like it's ready to explode. You know, if you slow down and you pay attention to your body, what is not okay for you and what is okay for you. So you may not get to tell your kids that they have to get along, because that is not in your boundary. You can't control that. But you can say, I don't listen to arguing. That needs to not be happening around me. You get to decide for yourself whether it's okay for you to listen to arguing or it's not. And then make a clear statement about what's okay and what isn't. And then the next part about a boundary is that when there's a boundary crossing, or a boundary violation is what I call it, then there needs to be a consequence to the person crossing your boundary. And that's what a boundary is. That's how a boundary is made clear, and that's how a boundary stays firm. So if I say, I'm not okay listening to arguing, and then the kids argue and bicker around me, and then there's no consequence to them for that choice, then that's not a boundary anymore. It's like Pirates of the Caribbean. I don't know if you've seen that, but they're more like guidelines at that point. No one will take you seriously about that boundary unless there is a consequence when crossing it. We're going to talk about how to do that later this week, how to give an appropriate consequence for that, how to give ownership for that choice to violate your personal boundary to the person crossing it, and then how to teach your kids how to create their own boundaries, like whether they will or will not argue, whether they will or will not be treated poorly by their sibling, and stand up for themselves and their own boundaries. But for today, we want you to identify, what are your personal boundaries? What are you okay listening to and not okay listening to? Thinking about your circle of control. What is in yours? You don't get to decide for your kids. You get to decide for you. What are you okay with? Now, you may want to say, well, I don't want them to fight because I want them to get along. We can't control that. We can't force them to get along. So what should be in your control? Whether or not you're listening to it, whether or not it's becoming a problem for you as the parent. So that may leave you possibly with more questions than answers, but I promise that we're going to resolve those questions and we're going to close this loop. But for today, in the comments, identify the personal boundaries that you have regarding sibling arguing that is in your control, whether you want to listen to it or not, whether it's a problem for you or not. What are your limitations with that? And then we will work through the rest of it throughout the rest of this week.